The tragic end of Juan Manuel Márquez at 52 years old. Today, we are going to talk about one of the most painful and complicated stories that modern boxing has ever produced. The story of Juan Manuel Márquez, a fighter who spent years being underestimated, underpaid, and overlooked, only to become one of the most technically brilliant boxers of his generation, but whose name will forever be linked not just to 4 unforgettable wars, but to a fall that was as brutal as anything he ever experienced inside the ring. Because when you talk about Márquez, you are not talking about a single tragedy. You are talking about several that built on each other, one after another, until the weight of all of them became impossible to carry. We are going to talk about everything, about the rivalry that consumed the best years of his career, about the accusations that followed the most famous knockout in boxing history, about the moment his own body turned against him, and about what life looks like for Juan Manuel Márquez today, at 52 years old, far from the lights that once defined him. To understand why this story hits so hard, you have to remember who Márquez really was. The fighter nobody wanted to pay born in Mexico City on August 23, 1973, Juan Manuel Márquez grew up in a family where boxing was not a choice. It was survival. His father had been a fighter. His brother, Rafael, would become one. The sport was in the walls of the house before Juan Manuel ever laced up a pair of gloves. He turned professional in 1993 and spent the next decade building one of the most technically sophisticated styles the sport had seen. He was not a knockout machine. He was something more dangerous. A counterpuncher who studied opponents like a professor, absorbed information in real time, and punished mistakes with surgical precision. By the early 2000s, he had established himself as one of the finest featherweights on the planet. But the world was about to learn his name in a way nobody expected. The night that started everything. On February 8, 2004, Márquez walked into the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas to face Manny Pacquiao for the first time. He was knocked down 3 times in the very first round, 3 times before the crowd had finished settling into their seats. Most fighters do not recover from a start like that. The body shuts down. The mind follows. The corner starts looking for an excuse to stop it. Márquez got up every time. Not just got up. He came back and fought Pacquiao to a draw over 12 rounds that left everyone in that arena with their mouth open. He had been knocked down 3 times in round 1 and still found a way to make it competitive, to make it close, to make it a debate. The official score was a majority draw. Many observers at ringside believed Márquez had done enough to win. The result was controversial from the moment it was announced. And that controversy planted a seed that would grow for the next 8 years into one of the most consuming rivalries in boxing history. 4 fights, 1 obsession. The rematch came on March 19, 2008. Same opponent, higher stakes, more to prove. Pacquiao won by split decision. Again, the judges were divided. Again, Márquez and his corner believed the decision had gone the wrong way. Again, the conversation after the fight was not about who had won, but about whether the right man had been declared the winner. A 3rd fight followed on November 12, 2011. Pacquiao won by majority decision. 3 fights, 3 decisions. 3 times Márquez walked out of the arena with a loss or a draw on his record, and a burning conviction that the scorecards did not reflect what had happened inside the ring. What those 3 fights did to Márquez was complicated. They made him famous. They made him respected. They gave him a platform that his talent alone might never have built. But they also consumed him. The Pacquiao rivalry became the defining story of his career in a way that left almost everything else in the shadow. He had beaten some of the finest fighters of his era. He had won world titles across multiple weight classes. He had produced performances of technical brilliance that experts still reference today. But the conversation always came back to Pacquiao. Always. And so Márquez made a decision that would either settle the argument forever or break something that could not be repaired. The knockout that changed everything. On December 8, 2012, at the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas, Juan Manuel Márquez and Manny Pacquiao met for the 4th time. The first 5 rounds were close, competitive, the kind of chess match these 2 men always produced. Then, in round 6, Pacquiao threw a left hand. Márquez threw a right hand at exactly the same moment. Pacquiao went down, face first, unconscious before he hit the canvas. One of the most devastating knockouts in the history of the sport, delivered by a 39-year-old man who had spent 8 years being told he could not beat the man lying motionless in front of him. The arena went silent for a moment. Then it erupted. Márquez had done it, in the most dramatic way possible, in round 6 of the 4th fight. With a single right hand that answered every question, settled every debate, and silenced every doubter. But what came after that night is where the story gets complicated. The shadow over the greatest moment. In the days following the knockout, a name appeared in the conversation that nobody wanted to hear. Angel Heredia, a former performance-enhancing drug supplier who had previously cooperated with federal investigators. Heredia publicly claimed that he had worked with Márquez in preparation for the 4th Pacquiao fight. Márquez acknowledged that Heredia had been part of his training camp. He denied any wrongdoing. He stated that everything he had used was legal and properly approved. His team maintained the same position consistently. No official body sanctioned Márquez. No test came back positive. No formal punishment was ever handed down. But in boxing, when that kind of accusation attaches itself to the most famous moment of a fighter's career, the doubt rarely disappears completely. From that point on, every conversation about the 4th Pacquiao fight carried an asterisk in the minds of some observers. Not in the record books, but in the way people talked about it. For a man who had spent his entire career fighting for recognition, fighting for fair scorecards, fighting to be seen clearly for what he was, that shadow was a particular kind of cruelty. The body sends the final bill. After the knockout of Pacquiao, Márquez continued fighting. He was 39 years old and had already given more to the sport than most fighters give in a lifetime. But he was not ready to stop. In 2014, he fought Timothy Bradley for the WBO welterweight title. Bradley won by unanimous decision. The loss was clear, and it pointed towards something unavoidable. The reflexes that had made Márquez one of the most dangerous counterpunchers in the sport were slowing down. The timing that had defined his entire career was not what it had been. He fought twice more in 2014, a win against Mike Alvarado, and then a fight that many who watched it wished had never happened. In November 2014, Márquez faced Mike Alvarado in a rematch that ended with Márquez being stopped. He was 41 years old. The man who had once picked apart Manny Pacquiao over 45 rounds was now on the receiving end of punishment he could not process the way he once had. He announced his retirement in 2014, then came back in 2017 for one final fight at the age of 44. A win on points, but not the image anyone wanted to be left with. The body had sent the bill, and like it does for every fighter eventually, it had sent it all at once. What life looks like now. At 52 years old, Juan Manuel Márquez lives a life that is quieter than the one the sport once gave him. He has remained connected to boxing in various capacities, working in promotional and television roles in Mexico. He carries the reputation of a man who was never fully appreciated in the moment, whose greatness was often measured against a single rival rather than seen on its own terms. The 4 Pacquiao fights will always define how the world remembers him. That is both his greatest achievement and the most complicated part of his story, because in those 4 fights, especially the 4th, he produced something that boxing has rarely seen. A man who refused the narrative that had been written for him and rewrote it himself in round 6 with a single right hand. But the accusations that followed that night never fully went away. The losses that came after it reminded everyone that time is the one opponent no fighter has ever beaten, and the recognition he deserved across his entire career arrived slowly, incompletely, and often framed by what he did or did not do against one specific opponent. That is the tragedy of Juan Manuel Márquez. Not a single devastating night, not one scandal or one loss, but the slow accumulation of everything. The underpayment in the early years, the controversial decisions, the shadow over the greatest moment, the body that finally gave out, and a legacy that remains debated when it should simply be celebrated. Because in boxing, there are fighters who lose fights, and there are fighters who lose something much larger: their story. Juan Manuel Márquez never lost his story, but for a long time, the sport made him fight harder for it than he should have had to.